I'd like to welcome Cormac Burke of the Irish Fishing Seafood Alliance to the show to talk about the decline in the Irish fishing industry and what appears to be a renaissance or an attempt to rejuvenate that industry by fishers all over the country and all around the country. I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Cormac.
Thank you, Finbar, and I'd like to wish you luck with your new programme. Yeah, there is a lot going on in the fishing industry, or not enough going on, depending on which side you're sitting on.
Yeah. Just to familiarise our audience, first of all, with the IFSA, the Irish Fishing Seafood Alliance, could you maybe give us a brief background on that? Because it's a relatively new organisation, and yet it seems to have become the biggest fishing representative organisation in the country in what seems to be quite a short period of time. Could you give us a wee historical background?
Yeah, it basically grew out of, well, firstly, I have a lot of contacts in the industry because I'm an ex-fisherman myself, and at different stages I was editor of an Irish fishing industry publication, and then in the UK Fishing News and Fishing News International, and so I have a lot of contacts, and basically there are 4 main representative groups, and they're called producer organizations, and they represent their members in their region. But the fishing industry, by its very nature, it's not one single industry, it's a lot of separate small sectors, and every man trying to get the best for his sector. So there was an appetite for an independent voice, I suppose, for the industry, and I was approached and I was asked would I head it up, and yeah, like I say, it was just started last February, and a petition was got going, mainly to draw attention, to put political pressure and to lobby and to draw attention to the crisis that's in all sectors of the industry, from the big boats here in Kittybegs to the inshore guys to the whitefish men. There's so many different sectors being hit, and the impact on the rural coastal communities is unbelievable. I'm sure some of your viewers will be just astonished to hear what's going on.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a wee minute. The IFSA is funded by its membership, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's purely subscription, and it's done very well, and I think the level of subscription is proof of the appetite for an independent voice. There are over just coming up on 110 vessels now subscribed, from all sectors, from the big guys down to the small inshore guys.
Are you officially the largest organisation in the country now?
Probably in terms of numbers, because those 110 vessels are backed by a lot of individual people who have subscribed and kindly made donations as well, and 40 odd companies, ancillary companies like net makers, engineering firms, seafood companies, processors, of course. So yeah, in terms of numbers and membership, we're easily the biggest, but obviously in terms of wealth, we wouldn't be.
So to conceptualize the IFSA and its role, would it be fair to say that the IFSA is serving the function of addressing the problem that there has been separate organisations, POs, that have been advocating rightly for their own particular section of the industry, but that there hasn't been a collective representative organisation? Is that the kind of role? I'm just trying to, in my own mind, conceptualise what the IFSA is. Would that be a correct?
Well, I need to be a bit careful here, but the POs, the producer organisations, they do a good job for their members, and but to emphasize again, they are working either for the guys in their region, or they may be dealing with a particular sector, a particular type of fishery, which wouldn't necessarily be regional. They could have members in different parts of the country, but they're in that sector. So I won't comment too much on the relationship between the IFSA.
Yeah, and that's not where I'm going now. What I'm just trying to establish is that you're representing everybody, basically, not
everybody
in particular. Yeah.
All sectors. And like I say, those 110 boats are proof, because they're equally divided up between small inshore potters all the way up to the big mackerel boats you see.
Yeah. And there seems to be a void there, or demand for this, clearly, because the next question I'm going to ask you is, in terms of the decline in the Irish fishing industry over the last 30 years, could you give us maybe a debrief of that decline, and especially over the last, we'll say, 10 to 15 years? How have we got to a position where the fishing fleet in Ireland has to get together to come into a flotilla, in Dublin, in protest? Like, how have we got, how has this country got there?
Very simply, lack of political will. I think I said in one of my articles that Ireland is seen by the EU as the village idiot, because we are the only country who would, if you can visualize Irish waters as being a farm, our consecutive Irish governments have invited the EU to take Irish cattle off that farm. We'll send in EU cattle, we'll fatten them up on your land, and then we'll ship them back home. And this has been going on. I mean, many people will have heard by now, but at this minute in time, Ireland is now only allowed fish 15% of Irish fish in Irish waters. And to further simplify this, if you could imagine Ireland's waters are a football field, Irish boats are allowed work in one penalty box. And meanwhile, French, Spanish have increased in the last 5 years, have increased their effort in Irish waters by 50%.
But you have raised questions, and you're the first person I've come across to do it, about even those ratios, that, you know, that Ireland has X percentage of fishing waters in Europe or in the EU. And I can't remember the exact figure that we're told, but you have actually questioned the status quo figure. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, well, traditionally, I mean, for the last 10 years or so, I mean, we've often said, those of us in the industry and even the media, who are generally anti-industry for some reason, even they're aware of the figure of Ireland geographically or physically owns 11% of EU waters, and we only get 3.5% of the allocated EU quota. But with the exit of the UK now taking all their waters out of that scenario, that increases Ireland's physical or geographical ownership of EU waters, its share of EU waters, to around 20%. Okay, that figure is also currently being accepted. But the EU themselves, when they discuss EU waters, they are including the Mediterranean, the Azores, the areas around the Canaries that can't be fished. They're no-take zones. So hang on a minute. Let's now deduct all the areas that are not utilized for one reason or another. And when we say EU waters and the fishing industry, let's just talk about EU waters that are commercially viable. And then you see the slice, Ireland's share is more like 40%. But go back, we're still on 3% of the quota.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, and this is getting worse and worse by the minute.
It seems to be a death by 1,000 cuts, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I've used that phrase myself several times. And I talk about the political will. Just today on the IFSA Facebook group, I reminded people of an article I wrote recently, where a Donegal TD 10 years ago called for a complete review of the Department of Marine and said the industry had lost confidence in this department because the civil servants should not be running an industry, which has been the case for the last 30 years. And that TD is now the Minister for the Marine. and he is head of that same department. Apparently, it's no problem. They don't need reviewing now.
This is McConaughey, is it?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Fianna Fáil?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So that's maybe when you say there's a lack of political will, there seems to be will there, but it's not to advocate the best deal possible for the Irish fishing industry.
No, the Irish government, you know, like I said, it's successive governments, but the current coalition government is particularly bad. The Brexit deal happened. Michel Barnier was in a room with Boris and was supposed to be negotiating on behalf of the EU, the other EU nations, but was in fact negotiating on behalf of his French fishermen because they came out with the best deal. When the dust settled on Brexit and everyone got a chance to look at the figures, Ireland lost between 20 and 25% of the quota in its own waters. Denmark, France, Spain, Netherlands, all the most any of them lost was 6%.
Okay.
Now, when initially, when everyone got over the shock, they said, how come we lost so much? And they said, oh, well, you know, the UK waters, you had the most in the UK waters. But there was always a term called relative stability, which was used in dividing up the quotas. And again, to make this a bit clearer for your listeners, if you can imagine that the quotas in the EU, it's like a pie and everyone has a slice of a certain size. Well, whether the overall pie, which is decided by scientific advice, ICES, whether that pie gets bigger or smaller, every nation's share remained the same because that's the status quo, except when the Brexit deal came. Relative stability, the cornerstone of the common fisheries policy, went out the window. And basically, Ireland got shafted and lost 5 times more than any other nation.
Okay. And in terms of representation so far to government, what representation has been made that you're aware of, and what has the government response been, let's say, since the Brexit deal, prior to and since the Brexit deal?
Personally, from the IFSA, the minister does not like the sounds I'm making. He does not like to see the unity that I'm creating in the industry. And three times my articles have been raised in the Dáil, mainly by Sinn Féin spokesman on fisheries, Padraig McLaughlin, but also issues arising from the current crisis have been raised by Michael Collins, independent TD. The minister will not acknowledge the existence of the IFSA. And that's fine. I mean, it's not an ego trip for me. I'm not losing any sleep over it, but it's a slap in the face to the people in the rural coastal communities of this country. There are thousands of people going to lose their jobs if something doesn't happen.
But when you have a membership, at some point, look, this reminds me a little bit, and I won't get too waylaid, but the Irish Medical Organisation and the new medical organisation that had grown throughout the noughties, and that Leo Varadkar leaked papers to in the end. For 10 years, the government refused to acknowledge or recognise them as well, and they only wanted one advocacy organisation in the equation and that they could control. And I'm not saying that the POs are in any way being controlled, but maybe, as you say, they haven't seen this kind of unity, maybe ever, in the Irish fishing industry that the AFSA is creating. And maybe that's scaring them. Do you think that over time you will be recognised?
I think I did say in an open letter when the minister kind of doubted my credentials, he was trying to slap down the IFSA and said, you know, who is this organization? Nobody's ever heard of it, and I've never heard of Cormac Burke. And in an open letter, which is available in plenty of places, social media, I took a bit of an ego trip and I explained to him that I'm on first name terms with fisheries ministers in about 70 countries, because I've traveled extensively through my work with Fishing News International. I have interviewed the last 11 Irish fisheries ministers, and I have interviewed 4 EU commissioners, fisheries commissioners in my time. So most people know, you know, like I said, it's not an ego trip for me. Yeah. Most people in the industry know who I am, and by him making a weak attempt at dismissing me, he only showed himself up, you know, his lack of knowledge.
You know, there's a lot to be said for the idea that you'll still be in the game when he'll be gone. I
said that to him. Yeah. I said in that open letter, I said that the fact of the matter is that whether it's a change of government or a cabinet reshuffle, I'm sure he'd be a happy man to walk away from this brief. But I would imagine that I would still be in this. I'd certainly still be in this industry long after he's gone.
The industry has collectively got together over the last few months and staged 2 particular events which involved proving that the industry could get their boats together in an organised fashion for a demonstration or a peaceful protest. There was one in Cork, and there was I think a more significant flotilla of boats that came into Dublin port a few weeks ago. First of all, how do you think that day went? And do you think it has had an impact? Has it shaken the ministers and government in any way, or does more need to happen?
Well, I would have to first be honest and say that neither I nor the IFSA had any part in organising those events. And you know, my congratulations to the POs. They did a good job in getting that. The Cork one came first, and it was what they had promised. It was a show and tell. It was done respect of the public. It didn't cause any disruptions, and it was well supported, and it got the message out there. I'm inclined to agree, however, with the strong number of people who feel that by the time we came to the Dublin one, it was time for a more ballsy approach, shall we say, because the Cork one certainly achieved, you know, certain aims. It got the media interested. It got some politicians there, and it raised public awareness. But to repeat the exact same thing in Dublin, I thought was a missed opportunity. I don't encourage any sort of militant steps, but I thought Dublin was the time, because we are coming to the stage where, I mean, fishermen have already said enough's enough. And after 2 peaceful protests now, the general public who are starting to, you know, get a glimpse of what's going on here, you know, the sympathy is with the industry at this time. And ironically, you mentioned Deeks a while ago in the medical thing. Every time someone like me does an interview with someone like you, within 2 days, one of the nation's leading newspapers will have an anti-industry propaganda article that's leaked from an unknown source, telling the public that Irish fishermen are overfishing or they're breaking the law. And I wish there was somewhere I could put a big banner up for everyone to see. It is impossible to overfish. The fishing industry is the most regulated industry in the Irish fishing industry is the most regulated in anything in the EU. Every quota is logged, every fish is counted. You know, vessels have a system at sea where those that are monitoring, the monitoring authorities, the SFPA, can tell 24/7 where every boat is. And it's an electronic logbook. He must log every few hours the amount of fish on board. It is literally impossible, even if you wanted to. Yeah. So for people to leak so-called breaking news, fishing industry is caught overfishing, it's just complete, you know, it's worse than fantasy. It does a lot of damage to the industry.
There did seem to be an attempt to criminalise Irish fisher folk over the last few months in particular. Just to pull back a little bit, Cormac, to what next? there's a lot to be said for keeping your powder dry. And I suppose if Dublin, it was a very wet day, if I recall correctly, but if nothing else, it kept the powder dry in terms of being able to take a more militant stand into the future. What would you, you use the word ballsy. I'll pretend I heard you say ballsy, but what would a ballsy response to the government at the moment look like in your mind?
Well, I mean, firstly, in my position, I'm not going to advocate A, B, or C, but I can tell you some of the suggestions that are floating around at the moment. One of them is to stop foreign fishing vessels landing in Irish ports. That has been suggested because there's huge volume. I actually wrote down a little line here so people might be interested in this little bit. In Castletownbere and Cork, in that one port alone, in 2019, 1,837 articulated trucks of whitefish, amounting to 35,000 tons. This is caught in Irish waters by foreign vessels, by foreign EU vessels.
That's one harbour.
One harbour in 1 year, 35,000 tons, which breaks down to 100 tons a day. And since 2015, EU vessels have been allowed to increase their effort in Irish waters by 50%. Meanwhile, the overall quota for Irish boats working in Irish waters has reduced by 60%.
That's just a massive, massive decrease.
Well, that's just Castletownbere now. They land also in Dingle and in Kittybegs, French and Spanish.
Yeah. Just to finish up, Cormac, because I've no doubt we're going to have you back on the show quite regularly as things develop. I don't know, before we just finish up, actually, so one suggestion was the blockading of the foreign vessels landing fish. What other suggestions have come from members of the fishing industry themselves?
Well, I'll have to go back a step further because you mentioned earlier on, the minister, and the minister, somebody wrote him a script last January after Brexit, and he's still singing from that script. And he has set up a task force. He supports the industry. There's all sorts of lip service going on, but nothing actually solid. And the task force, the day it was set up, he announced that the probable outcome of the task force will be a decommissioning and a tie-up scheme. Now, decommissioning, Ireland has already gone through 2 or more decommissioning. Decommissioning is where you are, in terms of a car, you are paid to hand in the car and hand in your license, and here's a lump sum. Now, at one of these virtual town hall meetings a few months ago, I asked the minister, would such a decommissioning give the man the price of the boat or the value of the boat? When I say the value of the boat, he's lost earnings for the next 10 years at least. So the value of the boat would be at least 3 times the price of it. And the minister's reply to me is, there are no plans for decommissioning at this stage. Now,
but he had already said that the probable outcome would be decommissioning.
Yeah, and only last week he's indicated that decommissioning and a tie-up scheme is still on the cards. But the
tie-up scheme is where the boats will be, owners will be paid not to fish for a particular month, we'll say. Yeah,
but I mean, fishermen, I mean, your listeners might think, oh, well, that sounds like handy money, being paid not to work. But the big picture here is the Irish fishing industry, no matter what sector, the big guys or the little guys, everyone's lost a minimum of 30% of their income. Now, the knock-on effect, going back to any coastal port, a village or a big port, is you take 30% out of the local income and it affects people go out of work, people can't afford their mortgages, they move away, they take their kids out of the local school, the local shops, it's just
30% unemployment in any area would be seen as a disaster.
Yeah, and I would go as far as to say the government doesn't care. Rural Ireland.
The fishermen want to do it better, so they're talking about possibly blockading foreign vessels. What other suggestions have been made? I know this isn't coming from you, but these are some people. Let's listen to the grapevine, I guess.
Well, you know, like I said, the blocking of foreign vessels landing, and then of course the inevitable blocking of a major port, probably Dublin port, and then we'll see action. I have no doubt about it. We'll see action. Yeah. But why go? The industry is on its knees at the stage, and at some point, people are going to explode. I'm not talking about violence, but I'm talking in terms of major disruption to the capital. And then Micheál Martin will suddenly be able to talk. So I don't know why they are. You know, I want to make this one point before we finish up. I said about the EU seeing Ireland as the village idiot. Ireland in the EU is like the weak kid in the playground, and everybody's bullying that kid. And we have a government that will not stand up for the fishing industry, the same as the governments in Spain and France and Netherlands and other nations. We're an island nation, for God's sakes, and we're giving away. Yeah, by the way, the quota that we're giving away in other countries, fish quota is a commodity. In Ireland, fish quota is a marine resource, and if you look at the proclamation, it belongs to the citizens of this country. Mm-hmm. This government, nor any other government, has the right to stand back and let the EU slowly take a bigger and bigger percentage of this quota. And I said in one of my articles that when Ireland, the Irish government, allows the EU to increase its vessel numbers in Irish waters, increase the number of fish it catches in Irish waters, and then says to us, okay, lads, here's 600 million quid, take 200 million and reduce the size of your fleet. That's not decommissioning, that's acquisition. The EU superpowers, fishing powers, are literally buying up something in Irish waters that belongs to the citizens of the state.
For pittance.
Well, once it's gone, it's gone. You can't, and you can put aside, you know, if anybody's thinking in the background, the anti-industry people are going to wheel out sustainability, you know, and all these green elements. The quota we're talking about has already been scientifically advised. This is a sustainable amount of fish we're talking about. The problem is we're not getting it. Our neighbours are getting it.
And the green policies won't reduce the amount of fish being caught. It'll just reduce the amount of fish being caught by the Irish fleet, I presume.
Exactly. But like I say, even the amount that's been caught by the French and Spanish, it's still under IC's scientific advice. Yeah. So it's totally sustainable. So in this particular argument, let there be no green issue discussion. This is a volume of fish. It breeds and lives in Irish waters. It belongs to Irish people. And this government is sitting back and saying, oh, well, we tried, but I'm afraid here it is, lads.
It seems that the IFSA will be leading a very proactive campaign over the next few months, hopefully not too many months, to reassert the Irish fishing industry within Europe. Cormac, thanks for joining us. Just before we go, if people want to keep in contact, want to update themselves on what's happening, or even get more involved with the IFSA, how would it go about that?
Well, there's the website, irishfishingseafoodalliance.org. There's also a very active Facebook group, and they can email me direct at ifsacormac@gmail.com.
Brilliant. And if people want to just bring back their video a little bit so that they can hear that again and write that down, that might be the best way to facilitate that for our viewers. Cormac Burke of the IFSA will be joining you again soon. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Finbar.